So CDC6 is a protein that again belongs to the AAA plus or has domains that are belonging to the AAA plus ATPase family. So as one can see, towards the N-terminal, this entire domain has a Rec-A fold with which is the AAA plus ATPase family domain, and within this it has uh, a very specific conserved sequence. It has a region which is the AAA plus alpha helical lid, and it has also the winged helical domain. So you can observe that CDC6 has a very similar structure to the ORCs, that is the ORC subunits, and the ORC subunits also belong to the AAA plus ATPase family, and this also belongs to the AAA plus ATPase families, therefore the structural similarities. This conserved region is what is called as the initiator specific motif, and this is the region which enables the CDC6 to interact with the DNA. So effectively what one observes is that it is a single polypeptide, and it can bind to the ATP, and it has an inherent ATPase activity. When it binds to the ORC complex, so it is important that the CDC6 binds to the ORC complex. In many studies, what has been also shown is that it is CDC6 that brings the ORC complex to the origins, but not it is not so the case in all the species. Many a times it is the ORC that first binds to the replicator region, and then the CDC6 completes. Now the binding of the CDC6 kind of completes the ORC complex, which was a cashew nut structure, and it becomes a circular structure as one can observe over here. And you can see that it has gaps to allow the DNA to be held on to. So therefore, the CDC6 ORC complex together actually encircles the double-stranded DNA. Thereby, the CDC6 now having bound to the ORC is preparing the ORC to further go to form what is called as the pre-replication complex. Now, CDC6 per se, when it binds to the ORC, okay, its ATPase activity is not initiated when it binds to the ORC complex. In fact, when the ORC complex binds to the DNA, its binding to the DNA ensures that the ATPase activity of none of the ORCs is active. Similarly, when CDC6 binds to the DNA and the ORC complex, its ATPase activity is found to be inactive. The CDC6 is always bound to the ORC1. So it is in close contact with ORC1, and specifically many times, therefore, it is known as the CD6 ORC1 complex. And the CD6 binding leads to the ORC1 being pushed back and the ORC6 to come up front, which means that the ORC6 being brought structurally to the fore and the ORC1 being pushed down has an implication in formation of the pre-replication complex. The next key molecule is CDT1. The CDT1 is basically CDC10 dependent type 1 protein, and this protein has found to have a role not just in origin licensing but also in mitosis. Now, what is the understanding of origin licensing? Well, that at the origin you have the DNA unwinding is it is what giving a license for the origin to begin replication. Now that licensing of origin can happen only when you have the helicase loaded onto the ORC complex. So therefore the pre-replication complex has to bind to the MCM to ensure that this origin can fire, and therefore the CDT1 is having an important role to play in that. When one looks at the structure of the CDT1, it has a N-terminal domain, and this N-terminal domain has several sites at which phosphorylation can happen. So therefore, most of the phosphorylation sites are regulatory in nature, and it controls the activity of the entire CDT1. It has what is called as a central domain. This central domain has basically a region or sequences that can bind to another protein that is called as geminin, and geminin is a protein that is expressed during the S phase of the cell cycle. So it has a geminin binding domain over here. This central domain through a linker is bound to the C-terminal domain, and the C-terminal domain has what is called as the winged helix domain. But this winged helix domain in the CDT1 is not specific for binding to DNA, but it is more specific to binding to MCM27. So therefore, this winged helical domain present on the C-terminal domain of the CDT1 ensures that it binds to the MCM. Now, these domains are highly conserved across species. So, CDT molecule present in most different species are observed to have these regions. And so, there is a lot of homology that is present in these sequences in different species. So, they are considered to be, CDT1 is considered to be a conserved molecule across species. So the CDT1 is essential for MCM loading and thereby its role in what is called as origin licensing. So let us look at how it is actually helping the MCM to be loaded on the origin replication complex. So studies have shown that CDT1 has domains that can bind to the ORC CDC6 complex, but the binding of the CDT1 to the ORC CDC6 complex is only possible when the CDC6 and ORC are bound to ATP, which means that the conformation of the ORC complex that exists when both CDC6 and ORC have their ATP bound is the conformation to which the CDT1 can bind. So the affinity with which can bind to the ORC CDC6 is more when ATP is bound to the complex. So when all the ORC has the ATP bound and the CDC6 also has the ATP bound, only in that conformation you can have the CDT1 coming and binding to it. If the ATP in these is converted to ADP, then the affinity of binding of the CDT1 to the ORC CDC6 complex is reduced, completely reduced. CDT1 is also shown to interact with MCM27. In fact, studies have proposed that the CDT1 acts as a courier for delivering MCM27 to the ORC CDC6 complex. So what is observed is that CDT1 through its domains can interact with MCM6 subunit of the MCM27 complex, and it can also interact with MCM2, but the primary interaction is between CDT1 and the MCM6. And the CDT1 has to be in its dephosphorylated form, so there should not be any phosphorylation in the N-terminal domain if the CDT1 has to bind to the MCM27. So in its dephosphorylated form, it has a high affinity to bind to the MCM27. So what is observed is that there are a lot of soluble MCM27 complexes present in the nucleus, which can bind or to which the CDT1 goes and binds with high affinity. Now, when this complex is formed to an existing DNA at the replicator region where you already have the pre-RC complex formed, that is the ORC CDC6 complex formed, okay, you can have the CDT1 coming and binding to the CDC6. So when the CDT1 binds to CDC6, automatically two things happen. MCM27 comes and binds to the double-stranded DNA. So in fact, the MCM27 is loaded on the double-stranded DNA, and the MCM27 also is interacting with the ORC complex. So this is something that is extremely important. As mentioned, that the CDT1 is essential for MCM loading, but this MCM27, when it is loaded, is in its inactive conformation. So it is only loaded, but it is not able to unwind the DNA as it is in its inactive form. Having done the job of loading the MCM27, so that is how it has been helping in origin licensing. What is observed is that during the S phase itself, the CDT1 is released from the MCM27 ORC complex, and also the CDC6 is released. Now, interestingly, what is observed in the eukaryotes is that in one cell cycle, the DNA can replicate only once. That is a rule that the eukaryotes follow, which means that once this origin has been licensed to begin replication because of the loading of MCM27 having bound to the ORC, this origin is now licensed to fire to initiate the process of replication. It means, therefore, effectively, this origin should not have another MCM27 coming and binding in the same cycle. Hence, somehow, the loading of another MCM27 to this origin has to be inhibited or has to be prevented. So, therefore, the CDT1 molecule becomes the molecule for regulating this process. It means that the CDT1 initially has brought the MCM27, but after it has loaded the MCM27, it has to be prevented from loading another MCM27. So how is it done? There are several ways by which CDT1 is regulated. One of the ways by which CDT1 is regulated is that since this loading of MCM27 by the CDT1 happens at the onset of S phase, during the S phase, you have an increased expression of S-cyclin CDK, that is S-cyclin dependent kinase. And the S-cyclin CDK phosphorylates both the CDT1 and the CDC6. Now, the phosphorylation of CDT1 ensures that CDT1 does not bind to another MCM27. So that is one regulation. The second regulation is that during S phase itself, the geminin levels increase and the CDT has a geminin binding domain. So when the high levels of geminin bind to the CDT1 that is present in the S phase, then the CDT1 on binding to geminin now no longer is able to bind to MCM27. So thereby geminin is inhibiting the CDT1 to bind to MCM27. The third regulation that has been observed is that there is an increased export after the initial phases of S phase. There is an increased export of CDT1 and MCM27 from the nucleus to the cytoplasm. So if there are less levels of CDT1 and MCM27 present in the nucleus, you will not have the CDT1 and the MCM27 coming again to an origin. So that is the third. And the fourth regulation is that both MCM27 and CDT1 have been observed to be ubiquitinated, and since they are ubiquitinated, they are degraded. So the concentration, the amount of the CDT1 and MCM27 also goes down in the nucleus. So thereby, by all these regulation processes, what happens is that it is ensured that at a particular origin only one MCM27 complex, or rather the loading of the helicase, happens only once in the entire replication cycle. Coming to the next molecule, which is MCM27, this is basically the helicase. And unlike the helicases in prokaryotes, which are hexamers, but all the subunits are identical in prokaryotes, in the eukaryotes, the helicase also is a heterohexamer. So as one can see, MCM subunit 2 to 7. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 completes what is called as the heterohexamer. Now, when one looks at the structure of the heterohexamer, that is the helicase, one finds that the 6 subunits of the MCM27 forms what is called as a ringed structure with a gap in between that can hold the double-stranded DNA. Now, in fact, what is interesting to note is this, that the helicase, when it is brought, that is the MCM27 helicase, when it is loaded onto the ORC CD6 that is already loaded onto the origin in the DNA, the helicase that is brought in is in the open conformation. So one can see that you have the 6 subunits arranged typically as 2, 6, 4, 7, 3 and 5. This is how the arrangement of the 6 subunits is, but the 2 and the 5 subunits are reversibly dimerizable. That means they can dimerize to complete the close the subunits to form a ring, or it can remain gated, open. So the gate over here can be open, and this is a reversible reaction. So you can have closing in and you can have the opening of this between 2 and the MCM2 and the MCM5. When CDT1 binds to 6, MCM6 and binds to the MCM2, because the CDT1 is associated with MCM6 and the MCM2, the 2 cannot dimerize with 5, MCM5, and therefore the helicase remains in the open conformation when it is bound to CDT1. And it is in this open conformation that it is loaded on to the DNA, and it also associates with the ORC. So therefore, the helicase can now associate not only with the double-stranded DNA, but it can also associate with the ORC thanks to the CDT1 binding to the CDC6 as just observed. Now, when in this conformation the helicase is inactive, that is, it cannot unwind the DNA. Please also note that each of these subunits again belongs to the AAA plus ATPase family. So each of this has domains that can bind to the ATP, and it has inherent ATPase activity. And what is observed is at the interface of every subunit binding to each other is the ATPase activity, plus all the 6 have the ability to unwind DNA because they have the active sites. Each one has an active site to unwind the DNA and interact with the DNA. So each one has the active site to unwind the DNA as well. Now, when this becomes a closed structure, then it becomes active. So therefore, a helicase to be active, that is the MCM27 to become active, has to become closed. So there has to be something that is able to convert an open gated helicase to a closed ring helicase in order for the helicase to begin unwinding the DNA. So please understand that MCM27, when loaded onto the ORC CD6 complex, the pre-RC complex completes with the binding of the MCM27 helicase, but the MCM27 helicase is in its inactive form when it is in the pre-replication complex. So that is something that has to be kept in mind. Now, our next question is, are all the subunits needed for unwinding of the DNA? So what has been observed through various studies is that it is the 647 subunits of the MCM27 helicase that are used by to unwind the DNA or open the DNA at the origin or begin to open the DNA. So that is something that is important. And in many species, what has been observed that it is only 4 and 7 that is generally used for opening of the DNA or unwinding of the DNA. So the question that next remains is, then what is the role of 2, 5 and 3? So the role of 2, 5 and 3 is basically in maintaining the gated conformation. So both the MCM2 and the MCM5 regulates the opening and the closing of the DNA, or they are the regions which is responsible for maintaining the open inactive form of helicase. So that is the regulatory role that MCM2, 5 and 3 have to play. Now, so this MCM, it is a point of regulation as we observe, but what is observed is that MCM is a point of regulation during elongation as well. So it is needed in the initiation, but it is also needed during elongation. And it is found to be needed especially during replication stress. Like, say, for example, there is a DNA damage. So when there is a DNA damage, you know that replication halts. So at that point of time, when the replication is halted, the MCM should not fall off from the DNA. It should remain attached to the DNA. And therefore, the MCM becomes a point of regulation to ensure that the replication needs to be continued, and hence it has to continue to remain bound to the double-stranded DNA. Therefore, it is a point of regulation. What is important and interesting to note also is that at the origin, where you already have the ORC bound, it is not one complex that is bound, but it is a double hexamer that binds. And generally, the hexamer that is bound to each other is head to head. Okay. And there are several proposed mechanisms of how the double hexamers are aligned at the origin of replication. One mechanism suggesting that you have the first hexamer coming in because of CDT1 binding to the CDC6, and then you have another CDT1 and a CDC6 bringing in the second hexamer, so one after the other. The other proposal or the proposed mechanism is that there are two sets of CDT1 hexamer that comes and binds to the ORC. However, the exact molecular mechanism is not really clear, but what is definitely clear is that two hexamers do come and bind to the ORC. And both these hexamers are in the inactive form. So that is, they are present in the open form, and together with the ORC, this is what forms the pre-RC, that is a pre-replication complex. So at the G1 phase, at all the origins, you will find that the MCM27 double hexamer with the ORC is present on the origins. Whether it fires or not is dependent on several other initiation factors, but the fact is that the pre-replication complex is ensuring that the DNA is ready for initiation when the cell moves from the G1 phase to the S phase. So when it goes to the S phase, then the origin has to fire, that is, it has to unwind to begin the replication process. So this is something that is extremely important. The next key molecule is the CDC45. And this CDC45 is responsible for forming what is called as a CMG complex. And this CMG complex is important in forming what is the pre-initiation complex. So the C over here is actually what is CDC45. This is the first component of the CMG complex. M is the MCM27 complex and G is the GINS complex. So which means that the CDC45 has to interact with both the MCM27 complex as well as the GINS complex. So it is cell division cycle 45 protein, that is how the name comes. And as mentioned, it is an inherent component of the CMG complex. When one looks at the structure, what has been observed is that the CDC45 molecule has a very close resemblance to bacterial RegJ. And bacterial RegJ is an exonuclease. When one looks at the structural similarities, one finds that there are two important domains, the DHHA1 domain and the DHH domain. You can find the same DHHA1 and the DHH domain present in the bacterial RegJ also. However, what is interesting to note is this, that in case of CDC45, the DHHA1 and the DHHA domains are interacting with each other. So they close in onto each other. And because they close in onto each other, this gap that is present in the bacterial RegJ is not present in the CDC45. Plus, because of this interaction, you have this alpha helix that juts out a little. So therefore, the conformation of the CDC45 becomes slightly different from the bacterial RegJ, and therefore one finds that the exonuclease activity in the CDC45 is absent, while that in the bacterial RegJ is present, because this gap in the bacterial RegJ allows it to bind to the single-stranded DNA, and carry out its exonuclease activity. Here, however, since that gap is missing, the CDC45 is not able to bind to single strand DNA. But what it is able to bind to is at the interface between the MCM2 and the MCM5 of the MCM2 to 7 complex. So this portion of the CDC45 enables it to bind to the interface region between MCM2 and MCM5. One of the noted factors, therefore, is that in the activation of the helicase, the CDC45 has an important role to play because on interacting with MCM2 and MCM5, it is able to bring in the MCM2 and 5 closer to each other. But this also needs the presence of the second complex of the GINS, which is the third complex of the CMG, which is the GINS complex. So effectively, CDC45, GINS and the MCM27 is important for forming the CMG complex, which is noticeably the reason why the pre-replication complex goes to forming the pre-initiation complex. So on binding of the CDC45 and the GINS to the MCM27, now you have the pre-RC getting converted to pre-initiation complex. What one also must observe is that the CDC45 and the GINS basic association of this with the MCM27 complex is dependent on the two regulatory kinases, that is CDK and the DDK. Now, the CDC45 is regulated by the DB4 dependent kinase, that is the DDK. So when the DDK phosphorylates CDC45, it binds with greater efficiency to the MCM27 complex. So the recruiting of the CDC45 to the MCM27 is due to the DDK, that is the DB4 dependent kinase. So from an open complex to moving to the closed complex of the helicase, the DDK has an important role to play, and it is doing that through the CDC45. So this is something that is important. We now go to the next molecule, which is the SLD3, SLD7. These two are initiation factors, and they have a very typical structure where it is basically two SLD3 linked to each other through two SLD7. So it forms a SLD3 SLD7 dimer complex, and the SLD3 has a domain. So it has two domains. Well, you can see this is one motif and this is another motif. This motif is able to bind to CDC45. So when you have a dimer SLD3, SLD7, you know that you can have this bind to two CDC45. So you will observe that CDC45 can come and bind to this domain, and the CDC45 can come and bind to this domain. So SLD3, SLD7 together binds to two molecules of CDC45. Why is this important? Because to MCM27 that is present in the origin, okay, you have the CDC45 loaded by one SLD3, and to the other MCM27, that is where you have a double hexamer, you should have two CDC45 coming and binding. And since it binds head to head, this CDC45 binds to this MCM27 and this CDC45 binds to this MCM27. So this SLD3 brings the CDC45 over here, and this SLD3 brings the CDC45 over here. So SLD3 and SLD7 are affected by the DB4 dependent kinase, which in turn bind to the CDC45, and these CDC45 are then loaded onto the MCM27 complex. So that is what the role of the initiator factors SLD3 and SLD7 is. So of the CMG complex, the third constituent is what is the GINS. Now, what is GINS? GINS is go, Ichi ni san. In Japanese, that stands for 5, 1, 2, 3. So why is it 5, 1, 2, 3? Because the components, the four subunits that comprise the genes is SLD5. So the 5 over here, PSF1, 1 over here, PSF2, 2, and PSF3. So thereby you have 5, 1, 2, 3. In Japanese, it is Go Ichi Ni San, and therefore this complex is called as GINS. Now, interestingly, all these four subunits are highly conserved and have been found across different species, eukaryotic species, and they have the same role. Now, GINS is definitely needed for initiation because as a CMG complex, the MCM27 becomes active and begins unwinding. So that is extremely important. So it helps in firing the origin. But GINS is also importantly a complex that is required for elongation and for the first primer and polymerase also to come and bind. So therefore, this has, other than being part of the origin or being part of the initiation, pre-initiation complex, it is important in elongation as well. Now, the arrangement of the GINS is that you have 5, which is always associated with the PSF1. So what is observed is the PSF1, SLD5 are one component or one dimer of the complex, and you have PSF2 and PSF3 forming the other dimer. So you have this dimer formed, and both the dimers coming together to form the tetramer. So again, you have what is called as a heterotetramer. Now, in between there is a gap, but part of the gap is plugged by a 16 residue amino acid sequence from PSF3. If one removes the 16 residue amino acid sequence from PSF3, then you would find that 80% of the pore is available. So what is interesting to note is this is an important feature of the structure of the complex. Now, what is also interesting to note is that every complex is able to interact with each other through specific helical domains, and one has a bundle of alpha helix present in each domains, and also species specific there are certain domains that are present, but effectively what is important is that they are able to exist in a form where you have a core gap present. So that is what is important. When you look at again the different structures, you can see that you have this component that is present over here, the 16 residue plugging in the core. So basically, effectively, the study has very clearly shown that the 16 residue plugs in the core that is present. Now, the helix-helix interaction is actually present between the interfaces of all the different subunits. So this binds, so SLD5 binds to PSF1 due to a helix-helix interaction, PSF1 binds to PSF2 because of another helix-helix interaction, and so on. So this is extremely important again. PSF1 is noted to be interacting with DNA polymerase binding protein 2. So therefore, the interface that allows the genes to bind to a DNA polymerase. In fact, there are several studies that actually point out to the fact that genes is used as an accessory protein by DNA polymerase eta, which is responsible for initiating synthesis of DNA in the leading strand. What is also important is that the PSF3 can bind to the MCM. So the genes interacting to be a part of the CMG is because it has a domain that can bind to the MCM, or PSF3 is responsible for binding to MCM. PSF2 is extremely important again. Suppose one removes PSF2, then the CDC45 is released from the CMG complex, and when CDC45 is released from the CMG complex, replication halts. So therefore, it is extremely important that the genes PSF2 is not mutated or not deficient. Otherwise, there can be a diseased condition. PSF2 is also the subunit that can bind to the DNA Pol alpha primase complex, which forms the primers in the lagging strands. So this is something that indicates that GINS has a role more than just in the initiation phase. It is also required for other phases. So it is a double tetramer formation has been reported. That means it's not necessary that it is only a single tetramer. You can have another tetramer bound to this. So you can have, just like MCM is a double hexamer, similarly GINS can be a double tetramer. And it is important to note that at the initiation phase, you have two double hexamers of MCM27 present, which requires presence of two GINS and two CDC45. So therefore, SLD3, SLD5 adds two CDC45, and similarly, there are two GINS that can be present. Now, we go to the next molecules, which is the DPB11 and the MCM10. So the DPB11 again is stands for DNA polymerase binding protein 11, and it is associated with the CNG complex through GINS. When you have the S-cyclin CDK in the S phase becoming active, it is observed that this CDK phosphorylates two initiator factors, SLD2 and SLD3. So the phosphorylation of SLD2 and SLD3 enables recruiting the DPB11. When DPB11 is bound to SLD2 and SLD3, this DPB11 now is able to associate with the GINS. So this association with GINS actually allows DPB11 to bind to the CMG complex. And with reference to that, what is noted is that the CMG complex now has a role to play beyond. So initiation is definitely the case. It is allowing activation of the MCM27 to become an active helicase. But beyond that, it is also going to now surge forward, binding with other molecules to initiate the process of replication. So therefore, DPB11 seems to have a stabilizing role. It stabilizes not just the CMG complex, but it also is reported to have high affinity to bind to the single-stranded DNA, indicative of the fact that when MCM27 opens up the DNA, single strands are formed. And DPB11 would bind to the single-stranded DNA to stabilize the single-stranded DNA that is formed due to unbinding by MCM27 complexes. Now, interestingly, the single strands, the bubble that forms and the single strands that are created, the single strands are immediately bound to by a protein that is called as RPA. And RPA, replication protein A, is equivalent to single-stranded binding proteins in the prokaryotes. So this DPB11 associates with the RPA protein, but the catch is that all the RPA proteins have to be phosphorylated, which is taken care of by the CDK, the S-cyclin CDK. So the DPB11 binds to the phosphorylated RPA protein and stabilizes the single-stranded DNA in the bubble that is formed. So therefore, it has a role in stabilizing the entire complex and for the initiation complex to function better. MCM10 again has a role both, or it is able to associate or function along with these S-cyclin CDK and also the DB4 dependent kinase. So MCM10 basically, as it associates with single S-cyclin CDK, it enables or helps in this process. But what is also observed is that it helps in ensuring that it is able to let the CDC45 remain bound to the open conformation of the helicase and make it a closed conformation, that is, make it active. So conversion of the MCM27 from its inactive form to its active form is associated with the CMG complex. So the CDC and the GINS coming and binding. But the DTK, only when it is phosphorylating MCM2 and MCM4, then it is able to enable the CDC45 to dimerize the MCM2 and 5 to form the active helicase and also associate with GINs. Now, as soon as you have the CMG complex formed, you can see that there is a external, or there is a gap over here which can hold the double-stranded DNA, but there is another side gap that is formed because of the CMG, because of the GINs and the CDC45. So studies have shown that if the DNA tries to escape from the helicase, okay, especially during replication stress, what is observed is that the GINs and the CDC45 traps the single-stranded DNA and does not allow it to escape the helicase. So therefore, this becomes a very important role which is stabilized by MCM10. But MCM10 also has a role in loading the DNA polymerase alpha, which is responsible for binding to the primase to form the primer. So the loading of the polymerase A to the bubble is initiated by MCM10. Moreover, MCM10 can interact with multiple proteins, single-stranded DNA, double-stranded DNA, and thereby it has been found to have a role in not just the initiation phase but also in the elongation phase. What is interesting to note is that structurally MCM10 has been found to be very different in different species. So in certain species, say for example in the humans, it is a hexamer and it forms a cyclic structure. But in many other species, it can exist as monomers, or it can exist as dimers or trimers or even hexamers, as you noted in the humans. So they have three important domains. One is the N-terminal domain, one is what is called as the intermediate domain, and one is called as the C-terminal domain. And between these three domains, it allows interaction with all the different molecules that are involved in the process of replication. So with this, let us make the conclusions. The ORC is a heterohexamer that binds to the replicator regions that enables ORC1 to bind to the nucleosomes to initiate replication. All except ORC6 are AAA plus ATPases, and the ORC assembles on the origins at the G1 phase itself to mark the origins in the DNA. CDC6 is an initiation factor which is needed to recruit CDT1 MCM27 complex to complete the formation of the pre-replication complex. However, the CDT1 binds the MCM27 in its open form so that it remains in the inactive form. It is not active when it binds to the origin. Regulated by CDK and DDK, that is the cyclin dependent kinase and the DB4 dependent kinase, and in conjunction with the different SLD proteins which are initiator factors, MCM10 and DPB11, the entire CMG complex, so the CDC45, MCM27 and the GINS complex becomes active to unwind the DNA. So conversion of the pre-replication complex to the pre-initiation complex is thanks to SLD proteins, MCM10, DPB11, CDK and DDK. Thus, CMG complex is also known as the pre-initiation complex. The DPB11 and MCM10 function not just at the initiation step of replication, but they also help in the progression of replication. Thus, single molecule studies, electron microscope cryo studies, and more such techniques have enabled unraveling the structure function aspects of the key molecules involved in the initiation process that are highly regulated and stabilized by several other proteins. Thank you.